So I thought this would be like a great segue into talking about development. I'm going to be using a chart from Dr. Erikson. He's a German psychotherapist from the early 1900s. And he came up with like these stages of development. And as I was like learning them and I was like gazing at where I am, like it fits. So I'm also going to be talking about some really controversial things that we do. Again, not in judgment. This is like noticing things and then just deciding to do them differently. Erikson says that we are wrestling with these things about our personhood, and based on if we pass or fail, this becomes a part of our personality long term. And this is where the controversy starts. 1 to 3, these are our toddlers. What are they working out? Autonomy versus shame and doubt. What is autonomy? A great sense of personhood. I know who I am and I know what I believe. Shame and self-doubt. That is outside of me determines the inside of me and who I am. So how do they do that? Through the things that we hate. What does that look like? A tantrum. If I don't get what I want, I throw a tantrum. What other way does that look like? I don't like the way you cut my apple today, even though you cut it like that always. What does that look like later in life? That looks like when my peers start to be overvalued in my life, I can pull back between the ages of 12 and 18 and decide what my peers doing? Is that what I should be doing? How else does that show up? In work environments and cultures, can I do the right thing over choosing conformity and fear? So Erikson says that we go the direction of autonomy and sense of self, or we go the direction of shame and doubt. That's a lifelong endeavor until we realize we don't have it. Ages 6 to 12, industry versus inferiority. And that's where I should be, as a parent, praising genuinely what they do well. And that's just not like the outcome, but the ability to try and maybe not get your outcome. It is also the ability of drawing in a sense of pride in what you do, asking questions. How did you come to that answer? How did you win so well? Drawing out the character that it takes to develop pride in what you do. And where do we see that at? That when I'm an adult, I will take and do the courageous thing. I will do the bravest thing. Where does that show up in? My profession. What do I choose to do for work? How innovative am I in the work environment? Do I truly take a sense of achievement and value in what I do rather than having someone else have to establish it for me? So what you get from both of those things, one, industry, that's coming from the inside of me. Inferiority, I'm letting people outside of me define me. And that last stage 12 to 18, this is when I start searching for independence. I start measuring who I am based on who I actually am in relationship with, and how am I different, and what does those differences mean? 18 to 40 is about building relationships based on my experiences there. Those determine lifelong whether I'm willing to engage with life in that way. I like this last point because we like to think that in our culture, what is really celebrated is single parenthood. And when you think about like the dynamic that exists, and that is the mom nurtures and loves the kid, the dad established a lot of discipline and direction, that the dad really establishes the self-esteem of the kid. And so when we are told that we can raise kids on our own, we can raise kids in poverty, another part is that poverty has lifelong effects. It affects the jobs and dreams that they have. It affects nutrition. It affects whether I'm going to be an obese adult. So we can't change any of these things, but we can notice them and absolutely begin to make concessions for them. Another one is emotional maturity and emotional regulation for the parent. because when we realize the kid is just working out really independence and a sense of self, do we really want to squash that with, I want to parent around really my comfort and my expectation? Or do we want to go into parenting and realizing that it's a lot of patience in that, it's a lot of selflessness in that, and it requires us to think of the long-term implications rather than short-term gratification. And we realize like some of the things like spanking and hitting our kid is like the worst thing that we can do. I'll leave with this because the verse that comes to mind is, he who spoils the rod spoils the kid. When you look up rod, it is like a shepherd's rod. And then I'm like, where do we see in the Bible or in life that the shepherd was beating the sheep? No, the rod is about discipline and love. We think about like how God like deals with us. Like, God doesn't pull down from heaven and you get fire on your head. God lets natural consequences are what really brings you in line. And it's the same with parenting, like choosing natural consequences. So if you didn't study and you got an F on that test, now what are you going to do about it? I'll leave with this one. This one was an example that my kid, when she got in high school, she was getting bad grades in math and she had to repeat like her class, like during the summer she had to take it. And she had all these excuses. She was like, the teacher this, and people did this, and nobody does this, and just like all the things. So I went and talked to her counselor, and I had her brought in, and the counselor was like, she could have went to tutoring. We do peer tutoring. She can go to formal tutoring. Like, she had like a ton of resources before she got to fill in that class. And so I went to school with her. She for 2 weeks I went to school and I took notes and she took notes, and we compared notes. And I wanted to know like how she couldn't get it. If I got to reach back in my brain from like 20 years ago, how come she couldn't get it? And so that is just an example of parenting. Parenting isn't convenient, but if you're teaching a lesson, I never had to do that again, by the way. And she never spoke to me in the class. The last thing I'll say is this: if there's something on that list that when we look it up, we really struggle in that area, then we have to go after that skill set. So the problem isn't that you don't have it. The problem was just that the adults around you were not attuned enough to give it to you. So then I have to go after and get that skill set for myself.